Okay. All right. Here we go. So we're going to talk about the history of just kind of pretty high level, but just to give you an idea of just how far we've come in just even the last 100 years. And then Dr. Cook is going to go over some really exciting technology advancements and just kind of walk us through that, getting us to
Excuse us for a moment. It looks like we may have temporarily lost Julie. But again, for those that are still joining, our apologies for all the technical difficulties this morning. As much as we think we have Zoom down, it can always throw a few curveballs. So we appreciate your patience. And I see that Julie is back.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that was odd. Let me try that again. I don't know if it had to do with sharing my screen or what, but okay. How's that? We good? Were you able to see this? Okay, we'll just start fresh. Thank you all for your patience.
You can see it fine too.
Okay, can everyone hear me okay? And we're all good? Great. All right, so like I said, we're going to walk through, I'm going to share just some key moments in history, just kind of highlighting how far we have come. Dr. Cook will go over some exciting technology advancements, specifically around being able to see our own brain. And then Dr. Robertson is going to share really where we're at this point in time with having a holistic view of brain health and really some actual practical things that you can be doing. So without further ado, we will jump in to some brain-changing moments. So I think it's fascinating to look back at some ancient civilizations and to think about what they must have thought about the brain, right? Without having the benefit of the technology and the information that we have today at our fingertips. I really love this quote. It is one of the most complex and just interesting creations, I think, of all time. And so we get to study that. And so just thought this summed it up nicely. So here this is 1487, a long time ago. This was Leonardo da Vinci's some first drawings of the brain. Around this time, they started actually doing more dissections. And so they were getting better drawings at just understanding even just the anatomy of what does it look like, right? There weren't a lot of opportunities to get a glimpse into your own head. So they did a lot with animals or cadavers, but he actually would pour wax into them to get the molds of the ventricles, which are kind of the open spaces within the brain, and did some really interesting things to kind of get an anatomical just sketches of what the brain looks like. So that was very early. And then in the 1660s, we see the first kind of sorry, I'm getting my screen situated. All right, we have Thomas Willis published The Anatomy of the Brain, and this is the first time that he uses the term neurology. And so they've got good physical descriptions of what the brain looks like and understanding the different cranial nerves and things like that, and the ventricles, but they have little understanding of function at this point. And then we jump a huge jump to now the 1800s. Between 1860 and 1880, we see a lot of key understandings, and they didn't even have probably all of this mapped out, but it's hard to find pictures that don't have it mapped that way. But here just wanted to illustrate that in the 1860s was when they really first started to understand more about the motor cortex and how that's organized. Then in 1863, discoveries around speech and language, specifically an area called Broca's area that's localized to the left hemisphere, discovered when there were stroke patients that had lesions in that area. And then in the 1880s was when we really started to understand that vision was in the occipital lobe in the back of the brain. So we're starting to add some pieces in here of now understanding localization around structure and function. Whoops. And then in 1873, a scientist with the last name Golgi invented a technique that allowed him to actually stain neurons so that they could draw them in really good detail. And so this is the first time we're actually seeing brain cells at this level. And still at this point, there's little understanding of function here, right? So they actually at first were hypothesizing, there was two very different viewpoints. They didn't know if each of these little cells individually worked or if it was kind of one thing that sort of all worked together. And we know now that there's actually kind of a little bit of both, but they are in fact individual cells that each function. And then jumping forward now to 1909, this is pretty significant. If you are in the field, you've heard of Brodmann's areas. He painstakingly went through, and the picture on the left is showing every single time he was looking at the cytoarchitecture of the cells. So every time the brain cells changed, he drew those changes and mapped those, and that's what created each of these different areas that are now sectioned off in the colored sections. And to this day, we still do refer to Brodmann's areas when we're talking about different parts of the brain. So starting to uncover more and more about just the anatomy and understanding of different parts. I have to mention in 1957, this is a famous patient, HM, where we learned most of what we know now about memory, understanding the hippocampus and the temporal lobes. This was a patient that had really bad epilepsy. And so they removed the temporal lobes on both sides, which is something that's really rare. Typically, when they did this, they would just do one side. And so he really could not do any new learning. He had preserved older memories, but new learning was, or he could kind of learn it temporarily, but then couldn't hold on to it to sort of form those longer term storage. So we learned a ton of what we know about memory from this incredible man that was part of that. And so now we're jumping ahead to 1977, getting a little more recent. This is actually the first human MRI image, first ever scan of a live human being, right? And so that was the image that they saw on that day. And just to also say that this is not by any means intended to be comprehensive, but just to show you the leaps and bounds that we've taken. And now to more recent days, we have the Human Connectome Project, right? Things that are looking at actually able to map all of the white matter tracks, the fibers, every single connection within the brain, and to be able to visualize that and really understand function. And then just catching us up to present day that, you know, this year we're going to be launching an app for the BrainHealth Project, and to think that you can have an app that not only is going to give you a baseline measurement and periodic assessments of your own brain health, but also give you training and ways to better understand and use your brain. And this is something that you have access to and just fits in your pocket. We have really come a long way, and we're excited at how this project specifically, you are going to carry us into the future of even deeper understanding about your own brain. And so I just want you to think about, you know, even within the last 100 years, just within the last century, we have doubled the human lifespan, but little has been done to double the brain span. And so we see that. And so that's a big part of what we're hoping to pull the discoveries that we learned from the Brain Health Project to help, again, lengthen that brain span to match the lifespan. But just even thinking about what your grandparents, how much they knew about their brain and what they knew to do to be proactive or not. And then your parents, and then you, and then thinking about what future generations, the type of just education or training that they're going to be armed with is really exciting. So that was kind of a whirlwind overview, but I'm now going to pass it over to Dr. Cook, who's going to dive a little bit, give you a little more detail specifically on the technology around allowing us to really visualize and see the human brain.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. I think it's fascinating to see and hear about just the history. And really, if you think about it, in particular, it's been in the last 50 years that the field of brain science has just moved forward by leaps and bounds. And truly, the turning point was technology. And I think in particular, Julie, if you'll advance the slide, of course, MRI technology, brain imaging has been huge. But really, just to kind of quickly run through sort of the past, present, and future when it comes to how technology is continuing to move our knowledge of the brain forward, and even what we do in our daily lives with our brains forward. If you'll advance the slide, Julie. As I mentioned, imaging has been a huge part of that. But in present day, we would really say that big data, or really bringing all of our knowledge together rather than operating in all these research silos, each area specializing in a different area or aspect of the brain. We finally have the capabilities to bring this data together and really advance the field in ways we couldn't before. And then when we look at the future, as I'm sure many of you are already experiencing, some of the real-time possibilities, what we can capture in terms of our brain's function in real time and how that's impacting all that we do is really exciting. So just to give you another whirlwind tour, Julia, if you'll advance the slide. Just to clarify, for those of you who are still not sure or don't know much about, for example, MRI stands for magnetic resonance imaging. Again, this is wonderful because it's non-invasive. You can simply go inside the MRI scanner and really can yield some incredible scans when it comes to brain anatomy. So great structural images. But then when you hear about fMRI, the F of course stands for functional. Now, instead of just looking at form, we can explore function. How is the brain activating? What is the activity that allows us to better understand how it is working and responding? Julia, if you'll advance the slide. So again, another quick timeline, as Julie showed you, it was really back in 1977 where we had our first human MRI capabilities. And fast forward a few more years, we were starting to see a real presence of this concept of biophysics, using really cool methods like optics to better understand how these cell systems in the brain are working. How do they communicate? And it really wasn't until the 90s that we really were now able to have this functional capacity. So really looking under the hood. And then as we move forward into the current century, even at a cellular level, that cellular imaging, and more recently, really advancing our understanding of what is the link between, say, our vasculature, our blood flow, and our neural activity. Really important implications there, especially as we look at brain imaging. And then what we're really excited about in present day is multimodal. In other words, bringing many different modes of neuroimaging together to really allow us to not only have good clarity, but also have good understanding of timing and capturing things at some millisecond levels, and then even bringing lots of different analysis techniques. So even, for example, if you experience an fMRI here at the Center for Brain Health, you're not just getting one type of scan. There are several different types of methods that are being brought together to really offer some state-of-the-art insight. Julia, if you'll advance the slide. As I mentioned, we do this kind of work right here, which we're really, really excited about, being on the cutting edge of these functional capabilities in the brain. If you'll move forward. And, that second portion, the big data, that's really all about, again, bringing all the researchers together. Julie mentioned the Human Connectome project. This is something that was launched back in 2009. And it's really, I think, over 20 projects, if not more, that are coming together that are all around this common mission of mapping the neural pathways that underlie our human brain function. So, there are groups looking at different age ranges, some more focused on developing brain, other aging brain. But it's amazing because they've been able to advance our knowledge about how we acquire these images, and of course, how we can share and then advance what we're learning by bringing all of our data together. And this concept of big data, having many, many images and data points, allows us to explore a lot more possibilities. If you'll advance the slide. And then really the next stage, of course, is integrating other kinds of technologies to really better assess brain health in the real world or in real time. Not all of us can go and get a high-tech fMRI scan. So now we're looking at applications that can be done in a typical doctor's office, or of course, integrating wearables devices as so many of us are using. Y'all might be familiar, for example, there's an aspect of the Apple Watch, some newer ones that will even look or try to detect for atrial fibrillation. So looking at different patterns in terms of cardiovascular health. So there's some really exciting advancements as we look at brain health possibilities here. Consider wearables that you wear to track your sleep. And so a lot more to come. In fact, the NIH launched back in 2013 something called the BRAIN Initiative, and the acronym BRAIN actually stands for Brain Research through Advancing Innovative Neurotechnologies. So I think this is something when we think about how much happened, in the last 50 years, it's truly unbelievable to see what's going to be happening in the next 10, 20 years in terms of having good insight on your brain in real time, and also being able to be vigilant and proactive to not only, spot problems, but also better understand how your brain is responding to the things that you're doing, whether it's training, bringing in these wonderful brain healthy habits, or, undergoing treatment. We can actually see the effectiveness of that for you. As we all know, all brains are unique. So the idea of having that precision ability is really exciting. So with that, I'm now going to pass the torch to Ian to just kind of really zoom out now as we consider the holistic brain health. And again, putting you in the driver's seat of some ways to be actively engaged in that for yourself. Ian, you're on mute.
Thank you very much, Laurie and Julie. That's a great introduction. It's lovely to have you all here, and thank you for taking part in the Brain Health Project. It's certainly the most exciting project I've been involved with in my career. So I want to just start off with a little puzzle. Could have the next slide, please? Which is, here we have a freeway or a road going very straight. Next slide. And I want to just tell you that over land where there is no geographical or geological need for it, over the decades, civil engineers have started to build curves like this in roads where there is no need, otherwise no physical need for them to have them. Next slide. So why do engineers build bends in roads when there's no physical need to do so? That's a puzzle for you. Well, it turns out, next slide, please. Our brains need challenge to sustain attention in the absence of external demands. So the reason that engineers have started to build curves in roads is to stop people driving off them. Because if the brain is not challenged to some extent, for instance, by steering around a curve, it will tend to lose concentration and crash. And the relatively few examples of completely straight roads for 40, 50, 60 miles that exist in the world tend to be littered with wrecks. Now, what you see below that is a famous curve called the Yerkes-Dodson curve. And that originally was studied, discovered in Yale in about 1908, which said that there's an optimal level of arousal or alertness in the brain that will allow you to perform a task the best. Too little and your brain underperforms, and too much and your brain underperforms. So when you're very sleepy or bored or jaded or understimulated, your brain is not sufficiently aroused for you to perform well. And similarly, if you're overstressed, overtaxed, very anxious or panicky, there's too much arousal and that interferes. Instead, there's this sweet spot in the middle. And what you see there, these little bar graphs, that's actual recordings from a part of the brain, which is critical to this whole enterprise of brain health, and indeed to your way of life and your health and your performance, and that's the locus ceruleus. And you'll see in the left, the bottom left, if you're haven't had much sleep or are understimulated, bored, jaded, this part of the brain has a fairly low level of firing. Similarly, if you're too stressed or anxious or too many demands made on you, it fires too much. In both of these cases, you don't get a good signal to noise ratio. You don't get a good distinction between the important signals in the brain, like something you need to remember, or something you need to notice, or something you need to say, or something you need to think, and the background activity. So in the optimal sweet spot, you get this beautiful distinction between the important signal, the task you're engaged in, and the background activation of this. And this is this function here describes the critical chemical messenger, part of your brain's natural neuropharmacy called norepinephrine, or in Europe or the rest of the world, it's called noradrenaline, norepinephrine. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. Next slide. Now, I'm going to give you a little exercise here that's relevant to what I've just said. And what I'd like you to do, and I'm going to do it as well, is close your eyes and breathe in to the count of 4 and out to the count of 6. Do it to your own count. Into 4 and out to 6. And do that 2 more times. Now, if we were all together, I'd say to you, how many of you feel slightly different after doing that compared to before? And most of you would put up your hand. Certainly, it happened to me. Why is that? Next slide, please. Next slide. There. That is because that little red part of your brain there, that's the locus coeruleus. That is the only source of norepinephrine in your brain. And the wonderful thing about the locus coeruleus is that it's chemosensitive. Its firing rate is heavily influenced by how much carbon dioxide is in your blood at the moment. When you breathe in that calming way, where your out breath is longer than your in breath, you actually change the firing rate of the locus coeruleus and control your own neuropharmacy. And so if you're feeling very stressed or very stressed or panicky or anxious, worried, you can alter the chemistry of your own brain and bring your norepinephrine levels back nearer the sweet spot. That will help you think more clearly, remember better, and feel more in control of your own emotions and better able to solve the problems that are causing you to feel that way. Next slide, please. So that is a very simple, if you like, brain hack. That is a tiny part of the whole enterprise we're involved in here, which is realizing that our functioning and indeed the structure of our brain's health is hugely potentially under our control, depending on what we do with it. And breathing is something we all have to do, but how we breathe hugely affects our brain functioning, our performance, and our well-being. Next slide, please. Now, here's an interesting paper from 4 years ago. When you're feeling stressed, or maybe not even stressed, maybe when you're very busy or a lot of demands being made on you, or you're hurrying or you're rushing, many of us, and I do this, tend to breathe more quickly. We often tend to breathe more shallowly when we do that. And sometimes we even unconsciously, and I do this, we hold our breath for periods. What that does, it changes the chemistry of our blood, which changes the rate of firing of the locus coeruleus, which changes the amount of norepinephrine in our brains and can actually take us away from our sweet spot so that we don't think clearly, remember well, or feel nearly as much in the zone or in control or alert. And what this shows, the amygdala is the part of our brain that's critically important for emotional functioning, for anxiety, and for anger. And what we see here is when you tend to be breathless, as I tend to be when I'm anxious or very busy, we actually increase the emotional functioning of our brain, which of course interferes with the smooth, clear thinking that we need to deal with the problems that are making us anxious. Next slide, please. And we know that this is one of the studies that we have done, is that our breath influences our focus, our attention, and our attention is critically important for our brain health, because what we attend to, either outside in the world or inside in our own thoughts and memories, shapes how we feel and what we do. So if we can control our attention, we're much better able to control our emotions, to control our performance, to control the goals we achieve in life, and to control our relationships with other people. We're much better captains of our own brain ship if we can control our attention. And the way we breathe actually changes that attention. Next slide, please. On to something quite different, apparently, that is physical fitness. Now, we all have known for much longer about the role of physical fitness in heart health. We've known about that for a much longer time than we know about its role in brain health. But in fact, the benefits of this knowledge about lifestyle and heart health has resulted in at least more than halving of the rate of cardiac deaths. People are much more heart healthy because they have learned that how you live your life and what you do shapes the health of your heart and therefore your well-being and longevity. But it turns out that our physical fitness has profound effects on our brain. We know it affects our memory systems because of brain fertilizer called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is triggered by aerobic exercise, which improves our memory system, the memory system that Julie was saying was damaged in the case HM, famous case HM. But our hippocampus, that memory center of our brain, is stimulated by and made more healthy by physical exercise. But that's also true of the locus coeruleus norepinephrine system that I was talking about here earlier, the one that's influenced by your breathing. That your physical fitness shapes your brain fitness as well. And maybe an even more important in brain fitness than in heart health, which would allow us to be ambitious about realizing our targets of, if you like, doubling brain health in the way that we've doubled heart health. Next slide, please. So just to show you here, these little colored blobs in the middle of the brain, they're what's called the brainstem nuclei, and they're basically the chemical factories for some of the critical chemical messengers, neurotransmitters in your brain. And we'll just look at the blue one there. That's the locus coeruleus, the norepinephrine system. Next slide here, please. And this is the study from our lab showing the quite significant correlation between how healthy the locus coeruleus is on the one hand, and what your level of physical fitness, as measured by VO2 max, which is how efficient you are at your body is at absorbing using oxygen, which is a measure of physical fitness. You'll see here, the more physical fit you are, the more healthy and robust your locus coeruleus is, which means that this critical neurotransmitter, norepinephrine, which is critical for your focus, but also more generally for your brain health, and what's called cognitive reserve. That is your brain's ability to withstand and cope with injury or illness. We see here that this aspect of brain health, physical fitness, is really tangible and actually probably much more bigger effect than any pharmaceutical known to science. There's no pharmaceutical that you could get from your pharmacist that could have anything like this effect on your brain function. Next slide, please. And here's a very recent paper from our lab. If I may say, the previous paper was done with Dallas participants in a study with the Cooper Clinic. This one here is with a different group in Germany. And you'll see here that there is this phenomenon called openness to experience, which is one of the big 5 personality characteristics. And one of the critical aspects of this personality characteristic to be inquisitive, to be open to new experiences, not to be very predictably narrowly focused with a kind of closed mind to new experiences. Next slide, please. What that does is it opens your brain to novelty, to new things. Curiosity creates novelty. Openness to new experiences creates novelty. And novelty is one of the most enriching of brain experiences. And that's why keeping ourselves interested, engaged, and active is so critical for our brain health and for our brain's longevity. Next slide, please. And this is just showing you a significant but smaller relationship between this quality of openness to experience and locus coeruleus density. Next slide, please. Finally, I just want to talk about social connection. You will know from our brain health app and our brain health index that has 3 dimensions of clarity, emotional balance, and connectedness. We've talked about 2 of these, clarity and emotional balance, but here connectedness is about feeling connected with other people. We're a group species, and our sense of connection with other people is one of the most important aspects of our brain vitality. And also our connectedness within ourselves with a sense of purpose and meaning. So that's what connectedness means here. And what we find is that our brain networks are strengthened to the extent that we have good connectedness. And that's what we're trying to foster and develop in the Brain Health Project. So I've run out of time here, but I just wanted to give you a kind of glimpse at the kind of holistic. I've talked just about 3 things here. I've talked about your breathing. I've talked about your social connection, and I've talked about physical fitness. But there are many other dimensions or inputs to our brains that perhaps we can cover in a future webinar.
Okay. The sound is a little frozen for me. I'm gonna through these. Hang on. Okay. I thought it froze for a minute, so apologies there. Ian, thank you. That was wonderful to give us kind of a very present day look from a holistic perspective and really touching on these three main factors, which you all know if you've taken your Brain Health Index, you get your very own set of measurements for those things. And then, of course, the training incorporates even more ways that you can be doing that. And so the last thing I'll end on, hopefully you could see that last slide, but we do have Brain Health Week coming up. This is something that is entirely separate, so in no way is it related to your participation in this research study. But if you just want to be a part of spreading brain health awareness, that's something you can do. You can go to brainhealthweek.org. It's also on our website, our Center for Brain Health website. There's 3 easy ways to participate. One of them is a text challenge. So we have during that week for those 5 days, you'll get a text in the morning giving you some type of challenge, a way that you can practice a brain healthy behavior or habit. And so you'll get one every single day that week. And so that's a fun way to kind of just challenge yourself, invite a friend to participate in that challenge with you. And then we also have a bunch of different, both virtual and in-person events throughout the week and ways that you can get involved with Brain Health Week. So I see we are pretty much out of time. I was hoping we'd maybe be able to answer a few questions, but I think just to respect everyone's time, we'll just go ahead and wrap it up. And we hope to do more town halls in the future. So if you enjoyed this, or if there's topics that you want to hear more about, please know that you will get, I think, a follow-up email survey asking you for your feedback about the town hall. So we always appreciate hearing from you. Any final words that you want to leave everyone with, Lori or Ian?
Just to say that I saw one of the questions just saying about there was too many details in the slides about the scientific references, but I just wanted to make sure that people realize that the very strong science that was going on here, that this really is, even though some of the methods that we're teaching appear quite common sense, actually they're grounded in such very, very strong science. Yeah.
And one for fun question, they wanted to know, Ian, is that your personal library in the background, or?
If only, yes. Trinity College Dublin's library. If you have a visit, sometimes a glorious place.
Yes, and then this is recorded, and so we will be able to post this. I think I don't know if an email gets sent out to you guys when it is posted, or if it just appears within the resources tab of your dashboard, but we can send a notification if one doesn't go out, so you'll know that it's recorded and you can watch it again later. So thank you all so much for tuning in. It was a pleasure to spend this morning with you, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you again, and happy Brain Health Awareness.
Thank you. Bye.